Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to one of Naseej Academy's series of webinars that aim to share knowledge, ideas, and reflection on topics of interest, new trends, and rapid technology in the field of learning, information, and knowledge management, and for sure, digital transformation. Today's webinar will be about a unique and interesting topic. It is the way to successful grant writing for libraries. In a world that is suffering from heavy economic pressure, libraries come on the front line of institutions that are facing serious financial challenges, especially with the continuous shrinking of library budget. In this regard, grants become one of the main sources of financial flow for libraries, and the grant writing become an essential skill that all librarians should adopt. Grant writing simply is the process of preparing and submitting proposals to secure funding from various sources, such as government agency, foundation, private organization, and even individuals. This webinar will explore the importance of successful grant writing for libraries and highlight key strategies for achieving funding success. It allows libraries to expand their services and programs, provide the necessary financial support to implement new initiatives, and last but not least, library can ensure that their services are accessible to everyone, regardless of their background or special circumstances. To talk about this topic, we are delighted to have Ms.Anne, the Senior Director at the Consortium of Academic and Research Libraries in Illinois, CARLI. She also instructor at iSchool at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign at the US, and has been on both sides of the grant process, having applied for and received many competitive grants and participated in the grant making process at both of Illinois State Library and CARLI. So she is the best one to talk about today's webinar topic. Please, Anne, the virtual stage is yours. We're all listening to what you will share with us to help us to really understand how to proceed, write a very successful grant. As a note, we used to wait until the end of the presentation and then open the gate for any questions you need to share, whether you can write it for sure in Arabic or English in the question and answer box. Thank you for attending this webinar, and I'm sure that you will be really happy about what you will hear from Anne. Please, Anne, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Professor, and thank you so much for asking me here today. It's so wonderful to spend some time with you all. I am truly honored. We have an agenda for you. Here are the things we will talk about. First of all, we'll talk about getting started with writing a grant, where to find grant opportunities, what are some best practices, some tips for grant writing, what are outcomes and evaluation, what does that mean? The funder's point of view, we want to think about what the grantor, the agency giving grants, what their perspective is and why that's important. And we also want to talk about what to do if your application is not funded. Goodness knows that happens. It's happened to me quite a few times. So what do we do when our application isn't funded? And then, of course, the most common missteps that you can make when you are applying for a grant. So that's our agenda for today. And I encourage you, please, to ask any questions in the chat or at the end on the microphone. All right, so a little bit about me and why I'm here talking to you today. Right now, I am the director of a library consortium. We have about 130 academic libraries in Illinois in our consortium, and I head up a group of people who provide services to those libraries. We have a number of grants currently that I've written or been a part of writing. One is an open textbooks pilot grant from the United States Department of Education for about $2 million to create open textbooks. These are textbooks that are free to download and read. We also have a grant from the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services for about $250,000 to help librarians in CARLI learn about assessment. In other words, how to talk about how their library matters on campus. And we have some State of Illinois grants from the Illinois Secretary of State. So we are heavily into the grant application process at CARLI. Before I had this job, though, I was the Illinois State Library Director for 11 years, and in total, I worked at the State Library for 27 years. At the State Library, we were in charge of administering state and federal grant dollars for libraries of all types in Illinois. We also wrote many different competitive grant applications. And like I said, we didn't get everything we applied for, but we certainly received a number of competitive grants when I was at the State Library. So I've been on both sides, as Professor Abdullah said. I've been on the side of making grants as part of the State Library administrative structure, and I've been on the side of applying for grants in both my job here at CARLI as well as my job at the State Library. So that's why I'm here talking to you about this today. I will also tell you that I teach a class for the master's degree program at the University of Illinois in Library and Information Science, and the class that I teach is Grant Writing for Libraries, and it lasts 8 weeks. So we are going to take 1 hour this morning to hit some high points from the class that I teach that is 8 weeks long, okay? All right, so you're thinking to yourself, how do I get started writing a grant? How do I even know where to begin? Well, it usually begins with a need that you see in your community or in your constituency, something that you could change if you could. If you had a magic wand, what would you say? I'm going to change this for my patrons, for my community. And it's usually something that we feel passionate about, something that we feel is very important. For example, if a factory in your town just shut down and a lot of people have lost their jobs, maybe you want to write a grant to help people write job applications and to help people update their resumes, that kind of thing. Something that you really feel would help the people you serve. Sometimes our grant ideas come from a sense of frustration. Oh, if only we had a ramp to get into the building, because now we have these stairs and people who are in wheelchairs can't get into the library. That's so frustrating. It would be great if we could change that. Also, things that bring you joy, things that make you laugh, those things can serve as inspirations for writing grants. Oh, I saw this beautiful art exhibit. Oh, it made me so happy. I would like to bring that exhibit to my library. It would bring my patrons so much joy, so much pleasure to have this beautiful art exhibit in my library. So things like that. I also want to encourage you to think about what the students who are born today, what they will need when they're in college or even in 5 years. You know, we need to prepare always for the next generation and for the next group of patrons and what they need. That can also be a great source of inspiration for your grant. I will use a couple of different terms in this presentation, and they're listed on the bottom of this slide. The first term is NOFO, and that stands for the Notice of Funding Opportunity, NOFO. That is a common term in grant applications. A NOFO is simply the application that's published by the grant-giving organization. It's the call for applications. So it's the document that tells you the rules and the procedures for submitting a grant. I'll also use the term GPO. That stands for the Grant Program Officer. That's someone who works for the organization that is giving the grants. So those people are your friends. They are there to help you get the grant. And so Grant Program Officer is GPO, and NOFO is the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Okay, so let's get started. Let's start thinking about how you can make a difference for your target audience. And by target audience, I just mean the people you're trying to serve with your grant. It's usually a slice of your population. For example, it may not be everyone who walks into your library, but it might be those people who are now out of work because the factory down the road closed its doors, or maybe it's the elderly, or maybe it's children with special needs. Your target audience, that's the people you're trying to serve with your grant application. Okay, these are grant sources in the U.S., and they may not be applicable to the sources that you would need in your country, but these are many sources that we've relied on through the years for information about available grant dollars. I want you to pay attention especially to this grants.gov, this federal grant source. For the United States, grants.gov is the clearinghouse for all federal grants. So any grant that goes through the federal government, you apply for it, you find information about it on grants.gov. Additionally, all of the individual federal organizations in the United States have their own websites, and you can look on those websites for information about grants. Then there are a number of other kinds of sources that you can look for that I've listed here. I have found actually that just doing a Google search for grants for libraries is a good way to bring up different opportunities. But in the U.S., these are the sources I have relied on most heavily. Grants.gov, the clearinghouse for federal government grants, is a big database of every different federal organization's grants. So just typing in the word library here brings up a whole bunch of different grants. You can play around with this. You will get many, many grants that may not actually be for libraries, but just contain the word library. It's a very, very large database, but it is your window into the grants that the federal government here in the United States is offering. Frequently, I look at private foundations that are offering grants. Many of these organizations will talk about what their mission is. So for this example, the Kellogg Foundation, this is a big grant-giving organization in the U.S. They are interested in supporting projects that talk about children families, and equitable communities. So that certainly seems like something that libraries would be appropriate to apply for. So look definitely at different foundations, private foundations like the Kellogg Foundation that offer their support for library grants. I can think of many different projects that would fall under these three categories: children, families, equitable communities. There's also a number of blogs that list different kinds of grants. These are just a collection of different grant sources from all over the country. The big federal organization in the United States that supports libraries and museums with grant dollars is called the Institute of Museum and Library Services. IMLS is an independent federal organization that reports directly to the President of the United States, and they distribute grant dollars to different states in the country, as well as they have a number of competitive projects that they support. So if you're ever wondering, what kinds of grants IMLS is supporting, you can go to their website. This search engine that I have on this slide searches the different state program report projects. So these are grants funded by the federal government, but conducted by the different states in the United States. So this is a good place to look for ideas, to see how state government is using federal dollars for library services in the United States. Here in Illinois, the Illinois State Library, for which I worked for 27 years, takes the federal money from IMLS and uses that money to conduct different projects all over the state of Illinois. So this is just a good place to look for different projects. Okay, let's talk for a moment about winning your governing authority. And by governing authority, I mean whoever it is that you report to. Maybe there's a mayor or a public library board or your campus authority. It's the people that you report to that make decisions for the library. So why am I talking about this? Well, it's important that the people who are in charge of the library are really supportive of your grant project when you're applying for a grant. You want their support. You need their support. You want them to be with you to say, yes, this is a priority for my organization. You want them to be cheerleaders for your project. And you, as the grant applicant, can help them be cheerleaders by painting a picture for them of how that project will benefit the organization. What is it that it's actually going to do for your community, for your constituents, for those people who worked at the factory down the road that is now out of business? How is that grant going to help them? You, as the applicant, need to help your governing authority understand the importance of this application. And you need to be able to describe what it's like before the grant and what's going to change as a result of the grant. This is very important and a step that sometimes gets skipped. And I want to encourage you to really remember to do this step. You want your boss, you want the people in charge of the library to really, really be on your side. Because remember, the good things that a grant can do, that's good for them too. They want to be cheering. They want to be saying, oh, this grant did so much good for our community, for our campus, for our constituents. This was a wonderful thing, and here's how it mattered. Okay? All right, let's talk for a moment about best practices when you're writing a grant. It is very important that you follow the application instructions really, really closely. We have seen some instructions that tell us you can only submit 4 pages, for example. And in fact, if you submit 5 pages, they will take off that 5th page and it won't even be sent to the reviewers. So you want to be really, really careful to follow all the instructions, especially things like page limits and deadlines. Really, really be careful. In fact, what I do is I print out the application instructions, the NOFO. I print it out, I get a highlighter pen, and I go through that a couple of times just to be sure that I have seen all of the instructions and all of the ways that my application may be disqualified, because grantors are very, very serious about this. The reason they're serious is they want everyone to be on an even playing field. They want to be sure that your application is considered in the same way that everyone else's application is. Their reputation for fairness and equal treatment of all their applicants, their reputation is very, very important to them. I want to encourage you that if you don't understand something in the NOFO, which happens 100% of the time, there's always something I don't understand in the NOFO, some instruction that I'm just not quite clear about, that you ask the grant program officer. How are you going to know who the grant program officer is? In the NOFO, it will tell you who to write to for questions. That's the grant program officer. So if you don't understand something, ask. Don't guess. That's really, really important. You also want to respond to whatever the scoring mechanism is, point by point. Think about a reviewer who has a stack of applications to go through, and they're reviewing these applications and they get to yours, and they have to hunt to find the answers to the scoring criteria that they're using. They have to hunt through your application. Don't make them do that. Make it really, really easy for the reviewers to find the things that are in that rubric, that are in that scoring mechanism, so you can get every possible point for your application. You also want to look at the funder's website to find out if they have any example applications. Most funders, most grantors have example applications on their websites. Look at those. Find out what the funder thinks is a really good application, and use the different practices that are in that example application in your application. I also encourage you to be really, really clear in your writing. Don't use any jargon or acronyms. Just be really clear, because the people who are reviewing your application, it's not always people who work for the granting agency. Usually the granting agency brings other people in from the field to do reviews of applications. Usually the people they've brought in as grant reviewers, they may not have expertise in the issue that you are writing about. They may not know anything about the topics that you've covered in your grant application. So be really careful not to use any kind of trendy or really jargony language. Also, grammar and spelling and punctuation really matter. I also tell my students, don't overpromise. Your grant is going to do something very specific, very focused, and very defined. Because remember, in any grant project, you only have a little bit of time, a year, sometimes 2 years, maybe 3 if you're lucky, that you can only do so much in that time. So be really clear and don't overpromise. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it well. Here it is. I'm focused. I'm going to do this. I also tell students to avoid using the first person, in other words, I, we, our, us, because you personally, Anne, I'm not getting a grant. It's not me who's getting the grant. It's my library. It's not me personally who's benefiting from this grant. It's my library. So instead, I tell my students, when you're writing about your library, say, the XYZ library will do this, not I plan to do or we plan to do. That's just a good practice to always follow. And then always find at least one really good editor, someone who's a really good proofreader, to read that final draft at least a couple of times. And I always think it's better to have someone who hasn't seen the previous draft, someone who has fresh eyes, look at that final version to just be sure everything is clear and makes sense. This document, which is called Bloom's Taxonomy of Measurable Verbs, is a great tool to use, and I've given you a hot link here. It's a great tool to use to find verbs that really help you express verbs and verbs in a grant application, so that rather than saying, oh, I hope that a number of events will be interactive, you're going to say things like, these 5 sessions will require participants to use their skills. So you want to use really positive, active verbs when you write, and not verbs that are kind of wishy-washy, like, I hope, I wish. First of all, I don't want you to use I at all, but you want to really, really put across that you are confident in the outcome of this proposal. So the bottom line for you is, as you're writing this grant application, you're painting a picture. You are developing a picture in the minds of your reviewers of how your world is going to change as a result of this project, how the lives of the constituents, the community, the campus you serve, how that will change because of this project. Your solution to the need that you've identified in your application is this grant project. So write strategically, and again, pay attention to all of the restrictions in the NOFO. Having said that, I will tell you that the narrative really does need to be readable. It needs to be a story. It needs to be something that the reviewer can connect to, can feel, oh wow, that's going to be a really good project. For example, when you describe the problem or the need that you're trying to solve and your solution, which is your grant project, you want the reviewer to understand the problem and to say, wow, okay, that is a need in that community, or that is a need on that campus. And then you want your project to clearly illustrate that it is going to help solve that need or address that need in some way. And to do that, you want to be sure that you're really focused in this narrative, which is the heart of your application. You want to be sure that in the narrative, you have focused on your target audience. You have talked about who your target audience is. Let's go back to my example of the factory that closed down, and now we have all these people out of work. So I'm going to take some time in my grant narrative to describe these people who are out of work, that they once had jobs that had salaries in this range, and now they have nothing. They're out of work. Imagine how their lives have changed. You want to be sure that you have some data in there, and it's also okay to use anecdotal information that maybe your clients, your patrons have told you. But you do want to be sure that you have good data in there and that you've sparked a connection. You've made the reviewer, the reader of the grant, feel that this project is really going to do something that's important. And of course, because at the end of the day, you're asking for money, you want to be sure you have described how the items that you've budgeted are going to contribute to the success of that project. That's also a big part of your narrative. All right. So frequently, grant applications, the NOFOs, will ask you for outcomes. And I think this is sort of a difficult concept sometimes to understand. What is an outcome in a grant application? It means something really specific in library grant applications. An outcome is essentially how your project is going to change something for your community, how it's going to add to their knowledge or add to their skills. How is it going to change those things for them? So when you write your outcomes, and I've given you a little form here, you're going to say, okay, my target audience is the factory workers who've lost their jobs, and I'm going to describe them. And then I'm going to say how my project will change knowledge, skills, attitude, behavior, actions, or status for these people. So how is my project that I'm applying for, I'm going to apply for a grant to help them learn how to write resumes and update their job skills. So my project is going to change their knowledge and their skills for the next 2 years for these people who are now out of work. By how much? Well, maybe by 100%. Maybe the people who didn't know how to write a resume, who didn't know how to fill out a job application, maybe now they'll know how to do it. And I'm going to use the following evaluation tool to measure the impact. I'm going to do a survey. So I'm going to ask the people who come into the library and who I've helped write a resume or write up an application. I'm going to ask them to take a survey. And on that survey, I'm going to say, tell me how much you learned. Tell me if you knew anything about writing up a resume before you took this class. So you want to answer each of these questions for your project. And once you do, you will begin to see that your outcome for your project is that something significant is changing for your target audience. That's what an outcome is. You are moving their skills. You're moving their knowledge forward as the result of your project. All right, let's talk a little bit about the funder's point of view. And the funder is the organization that is awarding the grant. So why am I telling you about the funder's point of view? Well, it's really important to understand the funder before you apply for a grant. They have very specific things that they're trying to accomplish with their grant programs. And in fact, if you look at their website, you will see that they will say, here's what we want to do with our grants. Here are the changes in society, in libraries, in communities that we're trying to make. They'll say that right on their website. So it's important before you start writing that you understand what it is that the funder is trying to do with their grant dollars or their grant money. It's also important that you know that once the NOFO, the application, once it's published, it's not changeable. They can't change it once it's out there. So you are writing to the application as published. Once they put it out, people start writing. People start designing their projects. So if it doesn't fit your project, if you can't qualify for it, that's not the grant for you. You can't call the grantor and say, I wish that you would change your NOFO so that I could apply for it or so that my project would fit. You can't do that. Once it's out there, it's carved in stone. People start writing. And believe me, organizations that award grants have thought a lot about what it is they're trying to accomplish with their grant money. So be true to the NOFO. Be sure you understand what it is the organization is doing with their money. Their reputations are very important. They want to be sure that they are engaging in very consistent, fair practices for everyone who submits a grant. And your record, if you do get a grant, your record of grant excellence and managing a grant is really important. So if you get a grant, make sure that you file your reports on time, that you are communicating with your grant program officer all during the life of your project. They want to know that if they give you money, again, that you will do what you said you would do in your application. I tell my students that getting a grant is not a popularity contest, that the funders have to think about many, many, many different considerations as they're awarding grants. For example, let's take IMLS for instance. IMLS is a federal organization here in the United States, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. They are the big grant funder for libraries in the United States. So they want to be sure that they are giving grants to libraries maybe in every state, maybe every type of library, so public, academic, school, and special. Maybe in every category of grant that they have established. They want to be sure that they have covered all of the different diversities that they've identified. So many, many factors weigh in the decisions of the funding organization. Your application may have been wonderful. It may have been great, but they may have run out of money because they had to make sure that they funded applications all across the country or all across the state or whatever before they got to you. So it's not a popularity contest. It really, really is not. It is understanding that grantors must make many difficult decisions, and most grants are extremely competitive. So You don't always get everything you apply for, but you should definitely keep writing. All right, grant reviewers. These are the teams of people that funding organizations put together to review the applications as they come in. So, first rule, reviewers only know what's on the page in front of them. They can't guess at other information that you haven't told them. You want to be sure that what they need to know is on that paper in front of them. Don't assume that the reviewers know anything, because they could be from very diverse types of libraries that don't work with your patrons or don't work with students. They may be libraries that only work with certain types of populations, children, the elderly, veterans. It's hard to say. So make sure that what they need to evaluate, the application, you have given that information to them. And be sure you are writing your proposal for reviewers who have never worked in a library like yours. All right. What do you do if your application is not funded? Well, first of all, don't take it personally. No one gets everything they apply for. I would say I've gotten about half of the grants I've applied for, maybe. There are just so many other variables that funders have to take into account. When I don't get a grant, though, you can believe that I call or I email my program officer, my GPO, and I say to that person, hey, can you tell me a little bit about why my grant wasn't funded? Tell me if I can retool, if I can resubmit the grant after I correct the things that maybe were weaker or weaknesses in my application. And make sure you ask whether the funder and the reviewers, if they understood your project, if they understood the proposal, did the main idea come through? But always keep writing. You're not going to get a grant if you don't apply. So keep writing, even if you are refused for the project. I equate writing a grant to following a recipe. So you want to be sure that you've looked to figure out what your occasion is. What is it that you want to make? Do you want to make a new project for your constituents? Do you want to bring in an art exhibit? What is it that you want to do? That you've assembled quality ingredients. And by quality ingredients, I mean people to work on the grant if you should get the award. People to work on the grant who know what they're doing, who will work hard, who will do a good job, who are experts in the field. If you're doing a project on digitization of historic materials, are you going to hire people for this project who are experts in image creation? Are you going to do that? Does your application demonstrate that? That you've read and reread the recipe before starting. In other words, that you've looked at that NOFO and you've made sure that you're eligible. You've made sure that your project fits within the scope of the application, that the time frame is suitable for your project. You've looked at that NOFO again and again, and yes, it really does fit the project that you want to apply for. And then I found out, like, if there's technical jargon in the NOFO, that I've researched what it is that I don't understand in that NOFO, that I understand exactly what it is that the NOFO is asking for. And in fact, I've asked my GPO questions about anything in that NOFO that I don't understand. I've talked to them. And remember, the GPO, the Grant Program Officer, their job is to help you get the award. That's what they're there for. They're there to give away their money. They're there to make sure that all of the applicants who are awarded funds are successful, that they can look at their projects and say, wow, those projects are really wonderful. Let's really call attention to these projects. Let's write a newspaper article or an online article about all of these great projects, because this is the great work that our organization is doing. So remember, the GPO, the Grant Program Officer, is there to help you and to help you be a good grantee. And when you don't know, you don't have the expertise, that you have asked for help from experts, that you, if you're doing that digitization project, for example, and you don't have anyone on your staff who can do that work, that you've gone out and found an expert who can do the work, who does know what they're doing, and that you've followed the steps in order for the project, for the application. I would also tell you that presentation, just like when you're cooking a meal, presentation counts. It counts. You've looked at your grammar, you've looked at your spelling, you've made sure you've put in all of the pieces of the application package that are required by the funder. And of course, that you keep practicing. You don't get to be a good cook without practicing, and you don't get to be a good grant writer without practicing grant writing. Some common mistakes, and again, this is mostly from my time at the State Library where we reviewed thousands of grant applications. The most common mistakes are, first of all, that the idea really doesn't fit the NOFO, that this isn't the appropriate grant project for this particular NOFO. So be sure you read the funder's mission and you know what it is they want. That the grantee has not followed instructions. So again, read that NOFO a few times. Use your highlighter pen to highlight anything that's important. Follow those instructions. Page limits, font size, margin size, all of those things matter and could make your application, could disqualify your application if you're not following the instructions. With grant applications, you cannot miss the deadline. There's no ability in any grant I've ever applied for to miss the deadline. If you miss the deadline, you can't apply. So watch your time zones. Make sure that you know what the time zone is for the funding organization that you're applying to. If it's 5 p.m., where is it 5 p.m.? Is it 5 p.m. in which time zone? So watch that carefully. As I said, be sure you follow page limits and typeface and margins, lines that aren't allowed. All of this is really, really, really important. Again, use the prescribed settings, the settings that you'll find in the NOFO. A lot of grant applicants organize their application in a way other than what's prescribed, which I don't understand. Set up your outline with the headings that are in the NOFO. Don't make the reviewers hunt for the information that they need to highly score your application. Don't use obtuse or overly complex writing. And I always ask myself, could my mother understand what I've written about? That's the level at which you need to write. The budget instructions will be very important in any NOFO. So Be sure that you've involved a team of colleagues who can proofread what you've put in the budget and say, yes, that's true, or maybe you need a little more money for this, or wow, that's a lot of money. Maybe you don't need that much money for this piece of the budget. Make sure that you have involved a team of your colleagues to look at the application, but especially the budget. And also with the budget, you don't want to exceed the allowable amount. All grants have a cap. This grant is for a maximum of X amount. So be sure that your budget comes in at or under that amount. A lot of grants will have items that cannot be requested. So it'll say what the disallowed or unallowed expenditures are in the NOFO. Be sure that every expense that you've put in your budget is allowable in the NOFO. And then many budget applications, or many grant applications, have lots of different parts. So be sure that you have submitted a complete application package. In fact, one time I did this, I left out a part of my application package, and the funding organization called me and said, we can't process your application package because you left one part out. Luckily, I had applied before the deadline, so I had a day to fix my mistake, but had I not, they would not have been able to process my application. So be sure, and I recommend that you have a colleague double check that you have every single part of the application included. Be sure that you've submitted a complete application package. And don't ever put forth a sloppy or unprofessional looking application. Be sure that your grammar, your spelling, everything is professional looking and that it's very neat and tidy. And finally, talk to your grant program officer. Many grantors, will allow you to make an appointment with them before the due date of the application. And you can do that to review what your idea is, to review your proposal. They can give you some feedback. They can say, oh, you know, that's really not what we're looking for in this particular NOFO, or they can say, wow, that's a great idea. In fact, one time I submitted my application to my GPO in advance of the due date so that they could review it, and the GPO came back to me and said, we want you to partner with another library that has submitted almost an identical idea. And we think that the two of you working together will make for a much stronger proposal than both of you coming in individually. So that's what we did. It was a really good idea. So these are common mistakes on the left, and on the right are ways to avoid those mistakes. All right, so I have a few minutes here for questions. If you'd like to ask, I am all yours. And here's my email, by the way. I encourage you to ask me questions by email if after this presentation you think, oh, I wonder about this or that or the other thing. I encourage you to ask me any questions you may have by email as well. So what can I answer for you today?
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you, Anne, for this capsule advice, and also inspired, I think, comments and points that you shared with us. And for sure, it was, as usual, interesting and very inspiring presentation. You mentioned many aspects of the successful writing for grant. So I think this is very important. Maybe before we start the question, do you have a specific experience or case study that you need to share as an example to our attendees to give them the sense of hands-on grant writing?
Sure. I can give you the example of our most recent award, which is a $2 million award from the U.S. Department of Education to write open textbooks. Open textbooks are textbooks that students can use free of charge. So the NOFO for this particular competitive grant process, the NOFO was 80 pages. 80 pages. So we took the NOFO, everyone on my team had a copy of the NOFO, and we went through it and we looked for places where we didn't understand something or where we needed maybe an expert to help us, or we had questions for the program officer. We went through that page by page and really, really read it a few times to be sure we understood what we were getting ourselves into.
Mm-hmm.
And then the grant application package itself was, what we wrote was over 100 pages. So we put together this giant application, and we had to follow letter by letter, part by part, what the NOFO asked for. And so our team, because it was such a huge project, our team went through and we divided it so that I had a part that I was responsible for and the other people on my team were responsible for different parts. So we each took a part, and then once we had completed it, we shared it with the others, and they would go through to be sure we had satisfied the NOFO instructions to the letter. It was extremely intense, extremely complicated. There were a lot of concepts that were new to us in the NOFO, but we did a lot of research and we found out what we needed to know. We also talked a number of times to the program officer about the projects that they had funded before our project, and what they considered to be the most important characteristics of winning proposals. So we put this together. We included experts that we were not on our staff. We found experts who were not on our staff, and incorporated them into the proposal, submitted it, and were awarded this very competitive $2 million grant. So that was a couple of years ago. It's a 3-year project. It'll probably be a 4-year project by the time it's finished. But our team has stayed together, and we continue to work on this grant project all the way through to its completion. We file the reports like we say we're going to. We do the activities as we laid them out in the application. Not that everything works perfectly the way you think it's going to work, but when that's happened, we've told our grant program officer, this isn't working exactly like we thought it would, so we need to modify our project a little bit here or a little bit there. So everything seems to be, it's going great. We're doing very well in this project. So I hope that example is helpful to you in illustrating some of the things that I talked about.
Yeah, perfect for sure for me and for the all attendees. And that question just moved us to talk about more about the team. How do you select the member of the team? I know that the specialty or scope of the project that you already running for the grant shaping the type, but at least you have what we call pillars or essential role on the team that you used to collect or join this? Please talk more about this.
Well, in my experience, you need someone who's principally in charge of writing. So someone who's a good writer, someone who can write with clarity, someone who can follow instructions. You need a good writer. You need a good budget person. So on my team, our fiscal officer, our budget officer is very important because she's the one who watches the expenditures and who ensures that the reports are filed in a timely and accurate way. We have someone who is in charge of working directly with the people who are impacted by the grant so that we have feedback from our target audience at all stages of the project. So each of the roles of the project are very prescribed. We have another person who does nothing but set up Zoom programs for our members so that they can find out what they need to know about the project. It's when you have a good team working with you, it's possible to do a big project like this. And even small projects, Professor. You need a team that is dedicated, that is engaged, that understands that you're working toward a goal here in a very compressed time frame.
Perfect.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it's not mine. It's a collected question. Just I try to make it a bits and pieces. Let's move to the next one, which is I think there is many questions about many of the attendees just have their own projects and ideas and initiatives, and they need your advice to how to knock in the door of the organization in the state or maybe outside the state, United States, to propose these ideas or project to them so they can hunt or get the grant.
First thing I do, I'd look on the grantor's website.
Okay, and you already shared with us.
And right, be sure that your project is what the funder is interested in funding, what it is that they say they want to do with their money, okay? And they will say right on their website, here's what our priority is for this funding. So that's the first thing I do. The second thing I do is if your idea fits what the funder says they want to do, I would write to the grant program officer and say, hello, my name is Anne Craig. I have an idea. Could I talk about my idea with you? Or could I email about my idea with you? And frequently, the grant program officer will tell interested applicants whether their project is something that they'd like to see in the next application cycle. It's very common, and I would highly recommend that course of action. You can put a lot of time into writing an application that maybe no one wants to see. And I have done that. So now, before I submit an application, I make sure it's something that I think the funder wants to see, and then I talk to the program officer and I say, is this something that your organization would be interested in receiving a proposal for? And they give me their feedback.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. This is initiate a personal question relating to how many grants along these 27 years you won versus how many you lose. Do you have this little bit of comparison with the majority? Because this is at least give us some sort of sense of what you see along of this experience.
Well, grants are pretty competitive. It just, I'd say it's my track record has been about maybe
I
half
know
and half, half and half,
it's a
half I
difficult
get,
question,
half
but
I
it's
don't.
good. Yes, yeah.
Yep.
Did you have this experience of making sure that you did a very excellent job in writing the grant, but you surprised that you didn't win it, and vice versa?
Oh,
Something?
yes. Yes,
Okay.
I always think my ideas are wonderful.
Okay. This is good because you share the same feeling with everyone just working on such thing, and he, for some reason, this one. Okay.
Why didn't you fund it? It was a great idea. I don't understand. But
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can't say that to the program
Okay.
officer. What you can say is, you know, can I resubmit? Would you, you know, tell me? And it's the case that you will get reviewers' comments, and the reviewers will tell you most likely why it didn't get funded or where the problem areas are. But absolutely, I always feel like I should have had that grant, but you know, you just can't take it personally. They've got a lot of different projects to consider. So if you all write a grant and you don't get it, keep writing. Talk to the program officer. They'll help you. They want you to be successful. They really, really do, because it makes them look good.
Perfect. Let's move and dig in deep for some questions that related to once the library won a grant, but for some reason the library and the team couldn't complete the project or the initiative, or for some reason they failed to achieve the goals. What they can do, what you advise them in this case? Is there a possibility for changing the scope, make it a little bit narrower, or extend the time frame?
Okay, so I'm going to answer your question in a few different ways. First of all, you should never surprise your program officer. So once you're awarded a grant, if something isn't working, you need to be communicating with your program officer immediately and tell them, hey, this just isn't working the way we thought it was going to. And this has happened to me, everybody.
Really?
This has happened.
Okay.
You know, we thought this was going to be the way to do this, and it just wasn't. And, you know, depending on whether that's a big part of your grant or just a little part of your grant, you may need to renegotiate the award. Talk to the program officer about what can be done, what they might want to see as a solution. But if it's just a little bit of your grant, then they'll usually help you to just move some funding around or move some activities around. But never surprise the program officer. You really want to keep them posted about successes as well as challenges. You want them to know when you're having trouble. That's very important. So that's the first way I'd answer your question. The second way I would answer it is that every project has problems at some point. Every project. I mean, that's not unexpected. And in fact, some projects that are really experimental in nature, it may be completely acceptable to fail. Failure may be okay. It may be all right that it doesn't work, that you were trying something, it was an experiment, and it didn't work. And, you know, that's okay as long as you've put that in your proposal. We propose to do this project, and it may not work.
There is some risks.
So you just, you know, in libraries, we don't really have like big failures in projects. More it's just, you know, we need to reshape something or shift some funding, that kind of thing. But, you know, failure happens. It's happened to me in grant projects. Goodness knows, I have failed. But you have to keep the program officer aware of what's happening so they know, and, you know, when it comes time to file your report, you're not surprising them.
Okay. And there is for sure some sort of procedure for refunding or deduct the amount of money for logistics and this stuff?
In case of failure, you mean?
Yes, yes, or at
Okay.
least there is not enough time to complete it. So ahead of time, we stop completing and say that, okay, we have to stop here.
So most grant programs will allow what's called a no-cost extension. So you can extend the project for a year, 18 months, without receiving additional funding from the grantor. Most projects will allow for that.
Okay.
They don't want the money back. They don't want it back. They want to work with you to find a different way to expend the funds. They don't want the money back because they've already taken it out of their budgets. They've pushed it to you. They want to work with you to find ways to use that funding to achieve the object, the outcome that you stated. So they will help you to expend that money. They don't want the money back.
Excellent. So there is some sort, we can say, of flexibility on doing such.
Yes, they want you to do what you said you would do. But yes, if you cannot, they will definitely work with you. Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we have a question here from Mr. Adnan. He said that, will you tell me if the issue of age is a reason to reject the grant? I like that question.
If what? I'm sorry?
The age of the people in the team or whatever, the head of the library who is
No,
I doubt, I guess.
I mean, no, but it's not you personally who's applying for the grant. It's your library.
Yeah.
So if the library has, because you, me, Anne, I'm not submitting a grant to IMLS or whoever.
The organization, institution.
CARLI that's submitting a grant. So you're not the person submitting a grant. Now, having said that, I will tell you that reviewers are going to look at the people involved in working on the grant, because they'll have you'll have to tell them who's going to do the work. So they're going to look and they'll see that, oh, you've never done a project before, or if you're the lead, the principal, I mean, they may not be as confident if you don't have a lot in your resume that tells them that you know what you're doing. So the reviewers may look less favorably on less experienced staff who are going to be involved in working on the project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, for sure. And this is, I think, what the gentleman just raised.
Sure, of course.
Of the team and this stuff. Okay, let's move for the next question. It's about sizing the project that already applying for the grant. If the library has the privilege to suggest the amount of money needed, what's your advice for them? And is there a grant like this? That is just a grant as a name without putting a specific money, and the library can suggest amount of money they need?
I think there are foundations, Professor, that will say, tell us how much you need. But in my experience, the NOFO usually says it's a grant for $150,000 or it's a grant for $2 million. There'll be a cap that's stated in the NOFO.
Okay.
I mean, there are foundations out there that will say to a library, to a research institution, hey, how much money would you need to do this project that we want to have done? But I've never had a grant like that. There are lots of people who do have grants like that, but I've never had one like that. So
perfect. You mentioned the NOFO and these stuff. So if there is a library in the region here, like GCC or the Arab country, just need to have a joint project with the libraries in the state, is this also will be a potential, or there is a chance to have a grant like this, or this is supposed to be purely American libraries there?
Just depends. I'm sure there are, maybe not with the the federally funded, the publicly funded grants, but some of the foundations, the private grant sources, I'm sure those encourage partnerships across different nations. But I've never worked on one of those grants, but I'm sure that there are NOFOs like that.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about the copyright. So the outcome of the project and how to manage the copyright between the library and the funder.
The funder will tell you what they expect in that regard. So the funder will say in the NOFO, any intellectual property that's created has to be created under this kind of restriction or this kind of license. Publicly funded projects typically insist that the intellectual property is shared widely and freely, but that may not be the case with privately funded projects. So, but the NOFO should tell you what's supposed to happen with the intellectual property.
Maybe we're trying to take advantage of the time, so we do respect the whole time. So I try to merge some question, but there is a question just repeated about distributing the grant all over the life of the project. So does the funder have the right to negotiate, or we can say it as he said this, saying that you allocate huge amount for this stage or this phase, you have to, so is this something back and forth of negotiation with the library and this? Okay.
Absolutely. So, the funder can absolutely negotiate.
Revisit the
absolutely. You bet. Okay. Absolutely. Funders sometimes, in fact, this has happened to me, the funder will call me and say, hey, we want you to put more money in for this activity because we had some discussion among the reviewers that you didn't have enough, but you have way too much in this other category and we want you to take it out of that. So they will frequently call you and negotiate the budget and actually the total amount of the award. That is absolutely an accepted practice.
But they don't engage in distributing the money within the team that's already working. So this is something internal with the team itself.
You've told them in your grant application how you're going to do that.
Okay.
So yeah. Okay. That grant application, think of it as a contract between you and the funding agency. Yes. You're telling them how you're going to do what you're going to do. And that includes how you're going to spend that money.
Perfect. We don't need to take too much time from you, and we still have these questions, but we have to stick to the time that dedicated to this one. We'd like to thank you so much. You always give us this interesting, outstanding talk and presentation. So I leave the last word for you to wrapping up this webinar, and on a promise that for sure we will see you again in another topic within Naseej Academy of Urbana. The last word with you, Anne.
Thank you, sir, and thank you all who've attended this. And you have my email address. If you would like to write and ask me questions, I'd love to hear from you. I thank you so much for your time and attention today. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and we do appreciate your time and effort and knowledge, and we congratulate for the very strong beginning of this year with your presentation. Thank you all attendees, and thank you again, Anne, and we always welcome you to attend Naseej Academy webinar. Have a lovely day. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.